Mercenaries are frequently the perspective we are given as a vehicle to explore the world of Battletech, depicted as noble warriors, often with armies that make them able to hold their own against the overwhelming states of the inner sphere. These functional microstates, or militaries without land in most instances, travel between war zones, fighting for profit, but they also typically hold their own ethical and moral convictions as they guide their readers through the winding roads of the inner sphere and the tragedies that unfold within it. Names like the Kell Hounds, Wolf's Dragoons, the Eridani Light Horses, Northwind Highlanders, Grey Death Legion, Snords Irregulars, and a multitude of others have made their mark on the history of the inner sphere, and as a result, are quite honestly the vision most people seem to have in mind when they see mercenaries in the inner sphere. But life as a mercenary, might not be as glorious across the occupation. In fact, one could assume that most mercenaries don't fit this mold. While there have been depictions of less scrupulous and competent mercenaries, this is not the norm. Instead of fielding the finest war machines, they field whatever they can get their hands on. In other words, they have whatever they can find. Instead of having a legion of soldiers and mechs at their command, they have whoever they can scrounge up at the bar. And instead of taking contracts that will decide the fate of the inner sphere, they might just be guarding some stingy old wreck on a backwater planet. This is hardly a glorious state of being, and it doesn't often make it into the fiction, at least not prominently, but there are always exceptions. In this video, let us go over a recent exception to the mercenaries rule, the bottom rung of mercenaries, if you will, and arguably not even, as they might just be con artists. The Death Kangaroos. We have to start with a really valid pair of questions that many people are probably asking right now. And rightly so. That is, who exactly are the Death Kangaroos? And more importantly, why do I care? Well, my marsupial curious friends, fear not, for you shall find your answers here. Let's start by saying, sometimes certain brands have an enormous amount of recognition. They've got a really specific style and feel to them. A brand can be built this way, whether it be in fashion or even military hardware, in fact. Sometimes, someone wants a bit of that brand energy for themselves, so they seek to emulate another style, hoping that they'll get a little bit of that extra recognition. While not explicitly stated, given the Death Kangaroo symbol, attire, and general vibe, they're very clearly trying to steal a bit of style from the Kell Hounds. This, to be clear, indicates that they are utterly shameless. Since Wheeler had mentioned work, I went ahead and put on my Death Kangaroos uniform. Black double-breasted jacket, red sleeves, black pants with red stripes, and riding boots with spurs. I said uniform, but it's really a costume. Last time I wore it, old Ephraim Wheeler got his daughter back from undesirable associates, and he paid my partner a fabulous amount of money. They then went and swindled me out of it. Now with that example out of the way, let's also add that referring to the Death Kangaroos as a unit is a bit of a weird thing, because realistically, it's more that it's the Death Kangaroo. There are partnerships and associations. People even seem to come and go, but realistically speaking, there's only one person at the heart of this fantastically absurd group of con men, and that is Captain Quarrel Hamilton. Despite his talents for fighting, calling Hamilton a mechwarrior or soldier seems almost out of place, as frankly he and his entire organization seem to be a long con, if I'm honest. But he's not a man without some virtues. Hamilton might be functionally a scoundrel and con artist, but he does seem to have some genuine care for others in spite of it. though I would not exactly want to cross him, and especially not multiple times. I'd also say he will carry through the letter of his contracts, but I'd never trust him beyond that. Hamilton has an air of desperation around him all the same, and given the quality of his living conditions and diet, with the latter word being charitable to be clear, it's no wonder why. But hey, at least he's got an entrepreneurial spirit, and more than enough low cunning and tactical capabilities to carry him through to success. Sometimes. Hamilton is also faced with problems from his clients beyond just their contracts, as they are people who aren't exactly trustworthy. Sometimes his patrons' requests, however, result in him forging new ties with new people, expanding the Death Kangaroos roster, but the permanence of these associates is yet to be truly tested, as of the latest installment for these scoundrels. Also, to be clear, Quarrel himself has no secret base on Galatea, the planet he operates from, nor does he have anything approaching a dropship. This operation, this fly-by-night gone-by-morning unit, is mostly run out of his home. The clients he engages with are hardly true nobles or governments either, the most frequent of which is one Ephraim Wheeler, at least so far, and he is a relatively corrupt and dishonest businessman who starts the Death Kangaroos' journey by having them rescue his estranged daughter, and later employs them to show up in an extremely insensitive historic reenactment of one of the brighter spots of the Kantari's massacre. This is done in order to feed his own ego and to display his wealth, and to outdo one of his own competitors, who is the patron of the other side. By the way, this is also all done to appease a club of rich people in their little war league. It almost makes you wish for the tyrannical crack of the clan warrior caste's whips when they see such flagrant displays of wealth and narcissism. Also, if it sounds like Wheeler is the kind of person you'd ideally not want to do business with for the most part, you would be absolutely correct. In fact, most of the people in Hamilton's story are people you would ideally not want to do business with. This does drive home the fact, though, that they are the Death Kangaroos, and not the Kell Hounds. However, this isn't wholly the case entirely. Captain Anna Key of the Crucius Lancers becomes an important ally, and a functional member of the Death Kangaroos, at least for now, though I don't see how Hamilton can really afford to keep her long term, given the circumstances of her employment, and given the quality and quantity of the work the Death Kangaroos have received so far. But who knows, another meal may present itself at some point. It's like a shark coming in to profit off a carcass while another, smaller fish nibbles at it. They're working together to wear down the meal, but are they truly allies? Well, I guess time will tell. By the way, Hamilton is the fish and Anna is the shark, most definitely. But who's to say the fish can't be in charge? He's got spirit. Why do I say this? Because Anna has a Hellcat. A clan war machine, and quite a terrifying one at that. And our boy Quarrel, he has a commando. Womp womp. Laney, who I assume has the last name Hamilton as well, but I could be wrong, is another tag-along brought into the unit. Given that she seems to fight for money in a burnt-out pit on Galatea, and will take the poor quality work her cousin Quarrel seems willing to offer her, it would be a little bit of a stretch to say she's the highest quality member of the Death Kangaroos. Again, it feels weird even calling them that to some degree, because who knows if she's going to actually stick around. She'd probably be smart not to. But hey, who needs to be smart when you've got a fire starter, am I right? The final member and last addition of the esteemed group of mech-piloting fighters is the youngest and least experienced. Some might even argue, can you count yourself as a Mechwarrior if you don't have a proper battle mech? Coming from a poor background, but having really the most honest spirit in the entire unit, comes one Kevin Turnbull. Turnbull wants to prove himself. He wants to move up in the world, and he at one point seems to have wanted a socialist revolution, though I don't think he's trying to get too carried away on that subject anymore. A fighter with true grit, he actually pilots a mech called Gimli, which carries a very large and impressive melee weapon. It's also not a battle mech. but a patched-together aggro-mech. However, despite his shortcomings and experience, Turnbull proves that he's not only someone who can be relied upon, even if he's coddled at first, but he is someone that when given the moment, can truly seize the day. Hamilton definitely seems to have a soft spot for him too. There are also figures who aren't mech warriors in this cadre of the desperate, dumb, and disappointing. The most prominent is a woman, Michael. Now, is that her real name? No idea. Is Michael actually on their side? Most definitely not. In fact, to call her self-serving would be too kind. A business partner of Hamilton, she's played her role in helping him get work, and in helping him lose everything of value that he got out of said work. She's a chameleon who changes who she is, to grift from one job to the next, and hasn't gotten herself killed for it. Yet. So, she fits right in with Hamilton and his assortment of associates, of course. To be gentle about it, as I'd not seek to insult a criminal, I mean honorable lady of such stature, she would steal the wallet from a dying man on the corner. Anyone who trusts her is absolutely setting themselves up to be her victim. Trusting her twice might be the worst idea ever, even. Now, she's not the only one either, too, as our friend Hamilton has another dear companion in the form of Savannah. The companion Quarrel trusts the most, it seems, especially on account that she sleeps in the same bed as him. She plays a vital role in advising Hamilton on his actions, or at least helping inform them, and at hazard I'd not want to cross her either, given how easily she slips in and out of situations. So, that's really the core cast of the Kangaroos. Why should you care? See, this is the second question, and it's the one that I feel is unfair. You should care about who the Death Kangaroos are for multiple reasons. First, they're a great take on what it's like to be bottom feeders in the inner sphere, which most mercenaries, frankly, are. Second, they've got a really cool logo. Have you seen it? It's every bit as cool as the Kell Hounds logo, while being totally original. It may in fact actually just be the Kell Hounds logo from Temu. But also you should care because you get taken down the road not traveled enough in Battletech. The Inner Sphere is an impossibly corrupt set of stratified societies, and we don't often get a window into that aspect of it. Certainly, some stories do touch on it, through the nobility more often than not, but rarely do their pawns really match up with the interests of their employers so well. The Death Kangaroos have only just started to appear. We're at the beginning of their story. It's almost like a narrative Ponzi scheme. You want to get in at the bottom, where it's getting started, so you can get the most out of it before it all comes crashing down in a heap of disappointment and disaster. Excuse me again. I mean, you want to get in as early as you can, so you can check out how high the Death Kangaroos are going to rise. No brakes on this crazy train, I tell you what. So, with the characters established, what incredible feats have the Death Kangaroos achieved so far? Well, they've appeared in 2 stories. A Night at the Lake, which is closer to a short story, and A Night in the Woods, which is the bigger takeoff point for the Kangaroos as a whole, which is more of a novella. I recently read both but didn't have time to write a review, or an overview of the unit, at the time while working first on the Banshee and then on the Thunderbolt videos. However, I was really drawn in by the unit and the story around it. Both stories are definitely connected. A Night at the Lake really does immediately move into A Night at the Woods too, though honestly, you'd not necessarily need to read the former to enjoy the latter, but it definitely helps. The strongest suits of both books are the characters and their presentations, as well as the brilliant satire that is rife within both. Even the players that have minor roles at various points may get expanded upon when you least expect it. Like, I never anticipated to see Gimli and Turnbull after the first book, where they weren't exactly named or important, nor did I anticipate they'd play such a key role in the latter book, or really become the character you feel like rooting for within it. When I do overviews for newer books like this, I really hate giving up all of the details of the books themselves, however. I think the fiction is worth reading, and in this instance, the Death Kangaroos won't disappoint. Both books are written by Battletech veteran author Michael Stackpole, and you can tell he enjoyed putting these pieces together thus far. It's not a big story covering the fate of states or major units, but by the end of it you might just care about the outcomes enough that their stories feel just as satisfying. I want to see where it all goes. I want to see how such a cursed unit could ever possibly be held together. Or, just as amusingly, I want to see how the whole thing falls in on itself as lies, grifting, and shortcuts all come back to bite them. So in short, I strongly recommend both A Night at the Lake and A Night in the Woods. Also, apparently, there will be another Death Kangaroo story that will be appearing soon in the next issue of Shrapnel magazine called A Night to Forget. I think that we'll end my thoughts on all of this, though, on this note. Relationships shift, alliances change, and Hamilton still needs his goddamn money back. We realize things don't look as good as they could, but we can explain. We did not steal your money. It's being invested. I reached out to Mike Stackpole for some questions regarding the Death Kangaroos, and the story as a whole, and he was generous enough to respond to these questions. I just have to say, it's a real honor to be able to ask these questions to a Battletech legend, and I hope all of you, the audience, enjoys. Buckle up, my naive Kell Hounds supporting friends, because we're going to get the answers about the Kell Hounds from Wish right here. Thanks for taking the time to answer some questions for me, Mike. Now, I think there might be an elephant in the room that needs to be addressed before we get into other questions. But did you notice that the Death Kangaroo symbol looks mysteriously like the 1990s Kellhound symbol? Is there a reason for that? It's no secret that I hated the 1990 Kellhounds logo. I think it was Jason Hardy who noted it resembled a kangaroo at Gen Con 2023. In one of those manic moments we all have at conventions, I announced I was going to write stories about the Death Kangaroos. I mean, they already had merch, so why not? And, of course, once that sort of idea gets into your brain, it goes off like a Roman candle. Sitting in the Indy airport, waiting to head home, I came up with the opening of the first story, and the rest is history. Alright, with that out of the way, what inspired the Death Kangaroos as a unit, dare I ask? There really aren't many units that end up getting stories that are like them. I've described the Death Kangaroos as the anti-Kellhounds. I realized I'd written a lot of stories about characters who have an utterly atypical mercenary experience. The Kellhounds have connections to money, so many things come easy to them. I started thinking about what it would be like to serve in a unit that has none of that. The more I considered it, the more intrigued I became. A very similar question, you'll have to forgive me, but I think fitting enough. What inspired Captain Quarrel Harrington? I thought he was definitely an enjoyable scoundrel to follow throughout the series. Quarrel's inspiration really came from the whole anti-Kellhound aesthetic. What would it be like to be a mercenary who didn't know where his next meal was going to come from? How do you live when your circumstances is so low you have to look up to see bottom? His being so broke also fed into the whole question of why would Macaulay want to swindle him? He has nothing, or he can't see what he has that she wants. From there, the character and the cast of characters in the stories have slowly coalesced. The third story even brings in yet another character to compare and contrast with Quarrel. All of this means I get to watch Quarrel evolve, and stories are presenting themselves to me, which let me have fun doing that. This is also a story in general about, you'll forgive me if I'm tarnishing these characters' honor and reputation, mostly very corrupt and questionably moral people, which I want to point out is something I absolutely loved. Was this more of a delight to write this band of ethically questionable folks, or a challenge? Oh, it's a blast to write these characters. I always find myself wondering how far Quarel and some others would go. He's clearly ethically flexible, but he's not a full-on sociopath. He draws a line somewhere. Exactly where, and exactly how sharp he draws it, well, that's yet to be seen. Still, the character and his reactions surprise me, and that makes everything so much fun. I really try to avoid spoiling too much for new stories that have just come out when I tackle units or books related to those units. But I'm going to ask this one anyway here for the video. Be warned, everyone in the audience, a spoiler is coming. How and why did you make the epic showdown in A Night in the Woods, Gimli versus the, quote, noble, unquote, urbanmech? I was mentally cheering during this particular sequence, I should add. Gimli versus the urbanmech. That was just something that had to be. One aspect of these stories is a solid skewering of the 1% and their view of the world by folks who don't see it that way at all. The last battle is the equivalent of a mangy cur picked up on the streets, getting entered into the Westminster Dog Show, and being up for best in show. The absurdity of it all points out the flimsy nature of society and civilization. And also, that battle works into Quarel's overall plan to get his hands on the Hatchet Man that got stolen from him in the first story. Final question. We'll make it a double feature. What do you hope most people take away from reading about the Death Kangaroos? And is there anything you'd like to say to the audience who has enjoyed these stories so far? Great question. What I hope readers take away from the stories is that the Battletech universe has got a lot more depth that most of the stories make it out to have. Many of the stories, and I am guilty as charged in this, explore the world from the nobility down or from the point of view of the innocent everyday person who is thrust into greatness. That works because the universe is so huge, but it's impossible to see how dizzying the heights are when you don't have a clue about the bottom. For every Victor Davian or Natasha Kerensky, there have to be a million Quarels. As for the message to those who have enjoyed the story so far, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really loved writing these characters, and that other folks like the stories is just very cool. Every time I crack a joke in one of them, or describe meals that hungry animals would run away from, I think about how readers will react while reading. Makes me smile. And if there are readers that don't like the stories, that's okay too. But I would point out, Quarel knows where they live, which means Savannah does too. I want to thank Michael Stackpole for answering my questions regarding these stories. I hope all of you appreciate these insights. And with that, so concludes my coverage of the Death Kangaroos. In what we've seen so far in their first two stories, I eagerly look forward to more. Thank you for joining me here today, everybody. First of all, if you've made it this far, I think you owe me a like. Second of all, when I do reviews for units like this or for books, often the YouTube algorithm isn't particularly kind. If you enjoyed this, also consider sharing it with your friends. If you're new here, by the way, I do a lot of Battletech coverage in both live stream form, interviews, and large mech overviews, as well as faction overviews. If you enjoy this type of content, you should consider subscribing. And finally, I want to give a massive shout out to all of the channel members who make this possible. If it weren't for your guys' support, I wouldn't be able to do this. So sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I will have the 2 books linked that are currently out for the Death Kangaroos in the top pinned comment below, just if you want to check them out for yourself. And with that, what do you think of the Death Kangaroos? Have you checked them out yourself already? Are you interested in checking them out? Let me know in the comment section below, and I will catch you all there.